Hello everyone. We are today compelled to think on the Uniform Civil Code, UCC. Perhaps it should be better called CCC, Common Civil Code. All of a sudden, the BJP government led by Prime Minister Modi has discovered, contrary to the recommendation of the 21st Law Commission, that Uniform Civil Code must be implemented with expeditious haste and that this should be the top agenda of the country. The Prime Minister has nothing to say about the tragedy of Manipur or the various other problems that plague India. There's only one problem that occupies his mind, his attention, and that is the implementation of the Uniform Civil Code. Well, to be fair to him, it needs to be said that he is following faithfully the promises made in the election manifesto of the BJP. It was promised that the Article 370 will be abrogated and Uniform Civil Code will be implemented, and it also needs to be mentioned that among the promises thus made is also the promise to address the Article 330 sub-Article 1, which confers on religious and linguistic minorities the right to establish and run institutions of their choice. And probably the turn for Article 30 sub-Article 1 will come. But that's a far more complicated issue as compared to UCC, because UCC is in the Directive Principles of State Policy, Article 44 of the Indian Constitution, whereas the educational rights conferred on religious and linguistic minorities is in the Fundamental Rights, Chapter 3 of the Indian Constitution, which is, or Article 30 sub-Article 1. Now, I don't have to mention this, that the activation of the UCC issue at this time is clearly done with an eye on the impending elections, both some of the important state elections that are due later this year and the 2024 general elections, to which obviously great importance is attached. Now, I cannot really address all aspects of the Uniform Civil Code issues in one video, therefore, I'll be also following up on this through a couple of other videos subsequently. But here, I'll make only a few preliminary observations. Now, the idea of bringing about some standardization of the laws applicable to the personal aspects, the personal freedoms or the personal rights of individuals, or they are called personal laws, as against criminal laws and civil laws. This is indisputable. I mean, no one would really insist that different religious groups should have different sets of personal laws, and especially if these laws are archaic and are in conflict with the ideals of modern life. For example, if there are personal laws, religion-based personal laws that are seen to be in a state of frontal conflict with the fundamental values enshrined in the Constitution of India, namely equality of rights or right against discrimination, so on and so forth, discrimination between male and female, then surely there is absolutely no justification for retaining or allowing such religion-based discrimination to continue, because the Indian Constitution is pledged to disallow every form of discrimination, including discrimination based on religion and gender. Unfortunately, in the religious context, discrimination based on gender is quite widespread, and I'm someone who supported Prime Minister Modi's initiative to abolish the triple talaq. The Muslim intellectuals will try to defend the triple talaq in their own way, but some of the more enlightened Muslim intellectuals have spoken up vehemently against triple talaq, and therefore, it's not that triple talaq has uniform endorsement from all members of the Muslim community. Today, I want us to focus only on one particular issue, and that is, ideally, religious reform or reforming laws based on religion, the practice of religion, should be done from within the religious community. That's the ideal state. But if you are realistic, you will know that that's the last thing one can expect. If you really expect, or if you assume that religious communities will reform their personal laws, you're completely off the track. Such a thing has not happened. So I don't expect such a thing to happen for the reason that all religious communities are dominated by the priestly class, and the special genius of the priestly class is in the zealous perpetuation of all archaic forms, because they attach supreme value to the superficialities of religion, and because that's where their expertise lies. Now, when a religious community refuses or proves its incapacity to reform itself over a long period of time, and it still entertains practices, customs, even laws that are contrary to the ideals and values of the fundamentals of the Indian Constitution, then a need arises to address that issue. I don't think it can be defended in any manner whatsoever, and those who believe that these aberrations can be and need to be defended are not only doing disservice to the Indian Constitution, they are also doing a disservice to their own community, because they are simply perpetuating the disabilities, the aberrations, and the infamy of their own community. If you take your religion seriously, then you also take your duty to reform religious practices applicable or perpetuated by your religion even more seriously, because to take a religion seriously is to keep that religion in its purity. And it is quite obvious that a religion which progresses through time over a long period in history gathers to itself various forms of aberrations. It cannot but happen that way. And these aberrations were not recognized as aberrations in their time, because today we're talking about them or thinking of them in hindsight. So what seems to us as indefensible aberrations or discriminations did not seem to be discriminations in the specific context in which these practices and customs came into being. And therefore, in those days, people did not have the wisdom or a sense of purpose in reforming them. But much water has flowed beneath the bridge, and we have come a long way. And today, when we look at these practices, they look quite out of tune with civilized life. And then to continue to insist on the right to practice them simply because they are part of a religious tradition, and people strain their intellectual capacities to prove that these practices have some kind of scriptural warrant. Sometimes these arguments look highly fallacious, certainly dishonest. All these things do not help. In this, I'm going to conclude my thinking here. I'll take up further issues in subsequent units. For me, the guiding principle when I think about issues like this is the principle that Jesus enunciated, and you find that in the 27, 28 chapters of there are verses of the second chapter of the Gospel according to St. Mark. Jesus says, religion is made for human beings and not human beings for religion, because the word used there is Sabbath. Sabbath there symbolizes religion, the practice of religion, especially the practice of religion under the authority of the priestly class. So the Sabbath is made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And therefore, the understanding and practice of religion must be strictly in accordance with an enlightened understanding of what is most conducive to the welfare of human beings, to the empowerment of human beings, and nothing that even marginally undermines the individual's welfare or individual's right to dignity and justice should be entertained by the members of a community. But unfortunately, what happens is that the priestly class, by invoking religion and devotion to God, cripples the capacity to think rationally on the part of the members of the religious community, and therefore even the most educated members of the community abandon everything in the hands of the priestly class, assuming that they are the middlemen of God and therefore they know best. And when it comes to the domain of religion, therefore, people simply refuse to use their rational faculties, their ability to think logically and rationally and in a contemporaneously relevant fashion. As a result, religious reform becomes a non-starter. And if a religious community or religious communities continue in that state, they become an eyesore to the nation. And I have to say this, that it's no achievement for any religious community to become objects of ridicule, objects of aversion, and to be perceived as archaic remnants that hinder human march towards civilization and progress. And therefore, in theory, in principle, I'm in agreement with bringing about desired or desirable religious reform. But then how do we go about doing this? What is the intention with which such agendas are unleashed? What's the extent to which one can go? These are all matters to be discussed in advance. In conclusion, let me only point this out, that to me the most anomalous thing in the present situation is that all of a sudden a national debate is being initiated without even the government bothering to present to the people of India a draft legislation, so that we really do not know what we are talking about. Those who express great anxiety or concern about the uniform civil codes really are talking in the air, because they have no idea. To the best of my knowledge, the government has not formulated, or if they have formulated, they have not presented to the public draft legislation. On what basis would we then start a dialogue or a debate or an intelligent conversation? So until a proposed draft legislation is made available, we can only entertain subjective apprehensions based on certain speculative points of concern, particularly the credibility of the agents who sponsor these reforms and their intention. But again, I have to say that it's a very dangerous thing to criticize anything based on assumed or presumed intentionality, because how do we know the intention of somebody unless and until that is expressed in unmistakable terms? Anyway, so we are in a very kind of uncertain, vague, speculative stage as far as UCC is concerned. Hopefully a draft legislation will become known in the near future. At that time, it would be possible for me to offer specific comments on the provisions of the legislation. For the time being, let me point out that the scope of Uniform Civil Code can be reduced into 4 major areas to be covered, namely marriage, divorce, adoption, inheritance of wealth. So marriage, divorce, adoption, and inheritance. So we have to really know, we have to wait and see what kind of proposals are brought about. Will it be, for example, an attempt to impose Hindu laws uniformly on all people, or will it be an attempt to bring the religious or the personal laws of various religious communities in tune with the basic principles and ideals of the Indian Constitution? If the approach is the latter, I would readily and gladly welcome this initiative. But if the attempt is to eliminate the distinctiveness of various religious communities, I would have to say that that intention is dangerously anti-democratic, because the perpetuation of the distinct identities of various groups is basic to the health and dynamism of democracy. And the Indian Constitution, the vision of the Indian Constitution was neatly summarized by Nehru. It is unity in diversity. Unity in diversity. Now, the difference between unity and uniformity, etc., these things, I'll try and point out in the next video. For the time being, I would say that my response to the present scenario is mixed. On the one hand, I readily welcome and I readily recognize the need for reforming personal laws to the extent that several of them smack of discrimination, and they are they are pre-modern and they're incompatible with democratic ideals. On the other hand, to the extent that for some strange reason the government has withheld the draft legislation from public knowledge, and therefore denied us the opportunity to undertake or to initiate an informed debate or dialogue on the issue. I think it's an unfair situation, and I hope that this speculative state of uncertainty will come to an end soon. At that time, I'll have a great deal more to say about the Uniform Civil Code issue. Thank you.